Sometimes I think of him. I saw a homeless woman walking with an old dog in her cart. The two of them kept rolling on. The ache stayed in my heart. Saw a homeless woman walking, never did catch her name. Sometimes I think of her. The truth is that we never...
Thank you and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. It's always great to be back. I almost feel like this is my second home. I've been here for about 5 or maybe 4 times, and every time it's such a pleasure to be here. So, how can I start? I have about 20 minutes. English is not my first language, and so I stumble a lot. I have my speaking or my remarks written, and so I have a lot of things to say to you and share with you today. So I will try to speak fast. So I apologize for this. I might make mistakes if this throw you off or you feel like you didn't understand what I just said. Feel free to raise your hand and just say, "What did you just say? I didn't understand what you said." I apologize for this in advance. It was really hard for me to pick a subject or a topic to share with you today. But I think we all have fears. We all have anxieties about things. Some of us are afraid of silly things, and some of us are afraid of, reasonable things. So some of us are afraid of balloons, or I have a classmate who's afraid of clowns for some reasons. People are afraid of certain animals or certain kinds of food. But in my case, throughout my life, but perhaps most recently, in the past 5 or 6 years, since I moved to the United States, I had to deal with a certain kind of fear that I've never encountered growing up in Egypt. And that's the fear of Islam and Muslims. That's something that I did not know when I was working on my paperwork to migrate here to join my wife, that I had to deal with. But it's a reality, and it's a sad reality. And I just wanted to share with you a little bit about this subject today, because I believe it's very important that before we learn about Islam, and that Islam is a monotheistic religion, an Abrahamic religion that shares so many of the tenets of faith with Judaism, Christianity, and even with Buddhism and Hinduism and all the world religions. It's a religion that teaches people to live and lead a good life, that people should pray, that people should have faith and trust in God, that people should be peaceful, should be kind to their neighbors, and all of these beautiful things that all of the world religions have. I think we have to deal with the issue of Islamophobia first, and hopefully work on eliminating it from our lives, from our world, before we get into learning more about the faith, which, when you learn about Islam, you find that it's surprisingly very similar to your religion, to Christianity, or to any other religion that you may learn about in life. So, to begin, what is Islamophobia? The term Islamophobia is defined by the Oxford English Dictionary as intense dislike or fear of Islam, especially as a political force, hostility or prejudice towards Muslims, and is today widely used to denote anti-Muslim attitudes and actions. It appears to have been first used in the year 1923, as early as 1923, but it came into wide currency through 1997 through a report that was published by a commission sponsored by the Runnymede Trust in Great Britain. The report listed the following as characteristics of Islamophobia. Islam is seen as a monolithic, static and unresponsive to change. And this cannot be farther from the truth. Around the world, we have 1.6 billion Muslims who come from different cultures and come from different countries and speak different languages. They eat different food, they dress differently, they speak differently. They even see their religion and their faith and interpret their religion differently. So to see Islam as a monolithic block or unresponsive or static cannot be farther from the truth. In fact, 3 weekends ago, I officiated a marriage for a Native American Muslim couple, a Native American Muslims couple, and that was first for me, to see that, how their culture and how their beautiful and unique and amazing background has influenced their understanding of Islam was, to me, an amazing thing. And so when you look at Islam or Muslims as a monolithic block, as unresponsive and as static, cannot be farther from the truth. It is seen as separate and other. It does not have values in common with other cultures, is not affected by them, and does not influence them. It is seen as inferior to the West. It is seen as barbaric, irrational, primitive, and sexist. And from this point, I want to share with you a reading from the Clash of Civilization. How many of you heard of the Clash of Civilization? It was first published in the 80s, I believe, as an article in the Foreign Policy Journal, the Journal of Foreign Policy, which hugely influenced the views of many in the State Department and many who get to shape the policies and the State Department policies of our country. And then it was turned into a book. And I want to read to you specifically from the section on the West and Islam. The West and Islam and the West, as it's titled, to be true to the publication here. And it says, the underlying problem for the West is not Islamic fundamentalism. Great. It is Islam. A different civilization whose people are convinced of superiority of their culture and are obsessed with the inferiority of their power. The problem for Islam is not the CIA or the US Department of Defense. It is the West, a different civilization whose people are convinced of the universality of their culture and believe that their superior, if declining power, imposes on them the obligation to extend the culture throughout the world. These are the basic ingredients that fuel conflict between Islam and the West. And that, the Clash of Civilization, what I just read to you, has greatly influenced the views of many in the level of policymakers, unfortunately, not just in America, but around the world. Islam, according to these characteristics, is seen as violent, aggressive, threatening, supportive of terrorism, and engaged in a clash of civilization. It is seen as political ideology, used for political or military advantages. Criticisms made of the West by Muslims are rejected out of hand. Hostility towards Islam is used to justify discriminatory practices towards Muslims and exclusion of Muslims from mainstream society. Anti-Muslim hostility is seen as natural and normal as a result, unfortunately. Now, many people think or ask me questions most of the time. Where does Islamophobia come from? Where does it stem from? Why does it continue to be mainstream and be back in the mainstream of not just America, but the West and the West in general? Well, the answer to this, according to many reports that I will share with you, is a network, an Islamophobia network. These frames that I shared with you earlier have formed the basis for a well-financed and organized Islamophobic movement in the last few years. Both the Center for American Progress and CARE, DC, CARE stands for Center for American Islamic Relations, have published extensive reports on what they term the Islamophobia Network, a cluster of organizations that promote and disseminate Islamophobic news. Their 2015 and 2016 reports name 33 organizations whose primary purpose is to propagate Islamophobia, and they call it the Inner Core. And 41 organizations whose primary focus is not attacking Islam, but which nonetheless contribute to and support Islamophobic ideology, and they are called the outer core. Among the outer core organizations are such prominent media outlets as National Review, Washington Times, and others. The inner core organizations take in tens of millions of dollars annually from donors, and especially from a number of right-wing foundations. And at this point, I want to share with you an example of how such organizations solicit their funds. About $205 million in funds that fund these networks that disseminate and spread fear of Islam and Muslims in our country and in our neighborhoods. And don't think that these are far away from us, from a peaceful and nice city such as Cedar Rapids, and a very welcoming city such as Cedar Rapids. About a couple of months ago, a friend of mine have showed me what he's not a Muslim, what he has received in his mailbox from one of these groups and organizations. I believe it's called the Secure Freedom. The organization name is Secure Freedom. And it is a questionnaire that was framed in a way to spread this fear and misinformation and misunderstanding about Islam and Muslims for the sole purpose of, at the end of the questionnaire, soliciting funds and donations. I will read to you one of the questions that they provide to their subjects. Question 3. Muslim immigration into the United States is taking place at record rates. As a result, sections of many towns and cities where Muslims are settling are turning into enclaves under the influence of Sharia-adherent Islamic supremacists. Many Americans are unaware of the problems associated with these forces, insinuating themselves into communities big and small throughout America. Have you seen evidence of this in your community or your state yet? Yes, no, or undecided. And the questions, you can determine for yourself the kind of questions that follow this and that came before this one. And the purpose of these questions, for many people who are unable, for some cases, or unaware, or not, or maybe do not have the education, or maybe do not have the means to question such questionnaire and its validity and its purpose as well, and how much money they can solicit on behalf of disseminating this fear among our citizens. And this was sent to a resident of Cedar Rapids. It's not far away from us. The Southern Poverty Law Center, which has long monitored hate groups in America, recently published a 2016 manual in conjunction with Media Matters for America, Center for New Community and Rethink Media, titled Field Guide to Anti-Muslim Extremists, which profiles 15 of the most prominent anti-Muslim extremists who use misinformation and hateful rhetoric to demonize Muslims. What are some factors that have enabled Islamophobic groups or individuals to demonize Muslims? Actions of extremist Muslims. We have to deal with this first, the elephant in the room. Terrorist attacks by such groups such as Al-Qaeda or ISIS, like the recent one in New York, by those inspired or influenced by them, obviously fuel fear and mistrust of Muslims and Islam. The rise of ISIS, an increase in ISIS-linked violence, both here and abroad, has dramatically increased Islamophobia in America, perhaps to a level higher even than after 9/11. Following any violent accidents or incident, such as the attacks in California, there is a correlated spike in anti-Muslim sentiment and hate crimes. However, the atrocities perpetrated by Muslim extremists are not by themselves the cause of rising prejudice against Muslims. A study by New American Foundation has shown that in the US since 9/11, far-right extremists, many of whom identified strongly as followers of Christianity or Judaism or other religions, have killed numbers of comparable to those killed by Muslim extremists. Indeed, prior to the Orlando shooting, rightist extremists killed somewhat more than extremist Muslims. And that is according to statistics published by the FBI that you can verify and fact-check yourself, not merely my own words or my own findings. And I wanted to share with you some of the numbers that are indeed very disturbing that was published in the 2016 FBI hate crime report. Now, 1,273 hate crime was reported to the FBI in the year 2016. And according to the categories of religion, the category of religion as a cause of these hate crimes, you can imagine that obviously 684, the majority of these crimes, were against followers of the Jewish religion. The anti-Semitism in the country is back on the rise. Followed by anti-Muslim hate crimes, 387. 387. And just to give you a perspective, the following anti-religion group which was the anti-Catholic hate crimes. 62 hate crime in 2016. And then you go to 387 anti-Muslim hate crimes, and then you spike to 684 hate crimes. And again, these are not findings that I found on a cheesy website or a Facebook or a post by a child or something. These were findings of the FBI. I got these numbers actually this morning from the website of the FBI. The offenders in the cases of anti-Muslim crimes were 381 offender, and the victims were 388 victims. And this is only by the category by religion. There are people who take Sikhs, followers of the Sikh religion, or people who are merely of a darker skin tone, just mistaking them for being Muslims, or people from the Arab or Middle Eastern backgrounds mistake them for being Muslims, even though many of them are not Muslims. In fact, minority of Muslims live and come from Arabic-speaking countries. And so the issue is, in fact, even though violent extremists among Buddhists and Hindus have at times drawn media attention, there has been no general vilification of these two religions and their followers, for example. Clearly, it is the actors listed above that have magnified, in some cases, the actors meaning the Islamophobia network, have magnified and in some cases deliberately exploited the crimes committed by Muslim terrorists to promote a general hatred of Islam. Ignorance about Islam and Muslims, and that's why I thank you for inviting me over and over again to speak and to share with you what I know about Islam. I think it was a year ago when I shared with you there was an event, I think, Prayathon, where I shared with you the maintenance of Islam, the 5 pillars of Islam. You will be surprised that our very little churches or organizations, whatever the background of the organization may be, are interested in learning about Islam and Muslims, even though ignorance about Islam and Muslims is a big issue in our country. Listen to these numbers. Muslims comprise no more than 1 to 2% of the U.S. population, and most Americans do not know any Muslim personally. Most Americans. According to a study conducted by the Public Religion Research Institute, only 16% of the public report knowing a lot about the religious beliefs and practices of Muslims, while more than 8 in 10 say they know a little. 8 in 10 of every American say they know a little about Islam, about 57% of the population. 26 say they know nothing at all about the religion. Fewer than 1 in 10, 8% of the Americans report daily contact with someone who is Muslim. Roughly 3 in 10, 29% say that at least occasionally interact with Muslims with someone who is a Muslim, while a majority say they seldom, 26%, or never, 36%, have conversations with Muslims. Obviously, this is a cause of the problem. Until recently, U.S. schools provided very little or no education about Islam, which means all the generation that are growing up, many of whom I go to school with at College or other public schools or at the university level, have not studied not just about Islam, but perhaps about many of the world religions. Obviously, another cause of this spike or of Islamophobia is xenophobia in general, known as the fear of the other. We all know that first there was the fear of the Catholics, there was the fear of the Irish, there were the fear of the Jews, there was the fear of the Chinese, the Japanese, and being Muslims are just holding the place for whoever comes first in this list. All right. So how then is Islamophobia disseminated and takes place in our country? Obviously, like other forms of bigotry, has many channels through which it spreads. To a large extent, it spreads informally, from person to person. Someone who may receive a report like this, or a survey or a questionnaire like this, believing its contents, which are clearly false and misinformation and deliberately designed to spread fear, they will go and they will share that with their neighbors. They will share that with the person next door to them or with their friends. It spreads informally from person to person and from generation to generation, and do other prejudices. However, there are a few major channels disseminating fear and hatred of Muslims and Islam. The first is the media. Negative portrayals of Muslims and Arabs, the two generally being conflated, because as I said, most Muslims are not Arabs, although for most cases Muslims and Arabs are put together in one basket, have a long history in the media, Hollywood and literature. Arabs and Muslims generally are seen as backward, ignorant, at best only semi-civilized. I, growing up in Egypt, have not seen a single American movie or Western movie that has portrayed a Muslim in any good character. I've always watched movies, and I've always admired American movies for how good they are made, the good special effects and everything. But in every movie that has had a Muslim in the plot or a character in the story, the Muslim was either seen as a terrorist or someone who just is the bad or the evil guy. And that is, I speak about from a personal experience growing up in Egypt, not something that's, a report will have to tell me that. A study published in the Journal of Communication in December 2014 found that viewers of national television news see far more images of Muslims as domestic terrorists than is actually in the case than actually the case in statistics. Far more. The study found further that among those described as domestic terrorists in the news reports, 81% were identifiable as Muslims. Yet in FBI reports from those years, only 6% of domestic terror suspects were Muslim. So to take 6% and to turn it into 81% of what the viewers receive, and we all know how great the influence of media and the vision and the pictures and the moving picture that on people, on us, all of us. We know that because the holiday season is upon us, and we all like to go shopping, and we most of the time buy things that we don't want to buy because we have seen them on television and we were told that we really need to buy them and we really need them in our households. And the same thing, when you are told that you have 81% of the people who committed crimes, and especially terrorist crimes, are Muslims or Arabs or this or that, while the reality is that they are only 6%. How different is this from telling you that you need a certain product while you don't really need it at all? In addition to this, proportionate coverage of stories relating to terrorism by Muslims, there is a tendency by both the media and law enforcement to label acts of violence by Muslims as terrorism, while similar violent acts by others are not referred to as terrorism. I only mentioned few: the mass shooting in Charleston Church in 2015, the Planned Parenthood attack November 27, 2015, same year, the Wisconsin Sikh Temple massacre in 2012, suicide attack on IRS building in 2010, and etc. Obviously, such unbalanced reporting produces and reinforces negative images of Muslims and Islam, and such views are heard on both ends of the political spectrum, from liberal commentator, without mentioning name, obviously, to other channels. and I mentioned Hollywood, so there's no need to go into details about this one. Politicians, I think that goes without saying. How much time do I have left? Huh? Not much? Okay. So I had so much to cover, and unfortunately the time flies by. But I want to end by perhaps sharing what is the impact of Islamophobia and anti-Muslim bigotry on American Muslims. Despite constitutional guarantees of freedom of religion and legal prohibitions of religious discrimination, American Muslims continue to experience a variety of concrete main manifestations of bigotry based on their faith. Recent polls show that anti-Muslim sentiment is increasing and that Muslims are seen as the least favorable of any religious groups. 2014 poll found that the percentage of Americans viewing Muslims favorably declined from 35 to 27, and that Arabs and Muslims have the highest unfavorable and the lowest favorable ratings of any religious or ethnic groups. That's me. I'm both Muslim and Arab as well. So that's unfortunate for myself. The hate crimes against Muslims and against mosques specifically, we had one that just took place this year earlier in a mosque that not very far away from us in a city in Minnesota. There was a mosque in Des Moines that received a very hateful letter that was published in the media here in our local media. So, how do we combat Islamophobia? Which was my last thing to say, and I had to skip a lot of things. I apologize for speaking slowly and not having much time. But first, through knowledge and education. Islamophobia thrives on ignorance about Islam and Muslims. Ignorance of Islamophobia are all too eager to fill with misinformation. A deeper and more comprehensive knowledge of Islam and Muslims in the present and in history is required in order to recognize and challenge Islamophobic distortions and falsehood. In this country, Muslims have been for as long as history can remember. Many of the people brought from Africa were practicing Muslims, and their children and grandchildren and have continue to be amongst us, and many of the African American Muslim communities are descendants of the people that were brought to this country years and years ago. Also, by standing up when you encounter bigotry in any form. Bigotry can only survive if people witnessing it allow it to go unchecked. Bullies, whether children or adults, can only continue their bullying when witnesses to their actions remain silent. It is critical that allies of Muslims and those who view any bigotry as an injustice stand up for them and do not allow the voices of hate and prejudice to prevail. I thank you for giving me the time and giving me the podium and giving me the place to share these with you. I know that this is a subject that is sensitive, and for many people, they may not like to hear about it. It is uncomfortable to talk about it, but it is only the uncomfortable subjects that has to be brought, and we have to confront them in order for us to find a solution. If we continue to sweep things under the rug and we continue to say that everything is good and everything is peaceful and everything is, we don't have any issues or any problems, then we will never be able to move forward together as Americans and as one nation under God. So thank you again for listening, and I will be here if anyone has any questions later, I believe. Correct?
My father's with his father. They're setting out some toys. The kids all want the train he's had since he was a boy. To be with you, to to be with you. I've fallen with my sisters